I never thought I would be the kind of person who has a custody agreement highlighted and tabbed like a textbook, but here I am. 2 years ago, my 7-year-old son, Liam, came home from his dad's place with a broken arm. Greg, my ex, described the injury as a roughhousing accident between Liam and his stepson, Jake, even though the ER report noted suspicious injury patterns. That's when I realized the difference between an accident and a pattern. The custody battle was ugly. Greg fought hard for joint custody, but the judge allowed only supervised visits. No overnights, no alone time. Jake received a restraining order after making a comment to Liam's therapist about breaking the other arm next time. Greg's parents never believed me. They dismissed the incident by saying that Jake was simply being a boy and that Liam needed to toughen up. However, toughening up does not fix night terrors. Liam still wakes up screaming about monstrous hands, and he refuses to sleep without his star-shaped nightlight. I even bought 3 extras in case it burns out. Last month, things finally seemed to stabilize. The supervised visits were going as well as possible, even with Marta, the visitation supervisor, quietly taking notes in the corner. Then Greg's mom called about their 50th anniversary BBQ scheduled for the following weekend, insisting that Liam attend. Greg, his new wife, Jake, and their 2 toddlers were all going to be there. She argued that he was family, as if that erased everything from the past 2 years. I refused, and she ended the call, shouting that I was punishing them for one small mistake. I even sent her a photo of the restraining order, but received no response. My own mom believed I was overreacting. She insisted that since Greg was their blood, I was making Liam miss out on family. I later discovered that Liam had been listening, hiding under his bed with his knees drawn up, a behavior I hadn't seen since the custody trial. I sat with him on the floor and tried to explain that his grandma's words were not meant to hurt him, though I knew my explanation was hardly enough. This morning, Greg sent me a text accusing me of turning his son against him and warning that we would see what the judge decided. I reviewed the custody order. On page 12, Section 3, it clearly states that visitation applies solely to the paternal parent, with no mention of grandparents, family gatherings, or forced unity. Our lawyer confirmed that I was in the right, yet the guilt still weighed on me. Later, Greg's sister left a voicemail saying that her mother was heartbroken and that I was depriving Liam of his heritage, a heritage which, to them, meant ignoring what had really happened. Today, Liam's teacher emailed me a photo from a class project titled My Family. While most kids drew sunshine and rainbows, Liam had drawn 3 stick figures representing me, him, and our cat, with Greg's face scribbled over in black crayon. The teacher noted that he seemed upset and wanted me to know. I placed the printout next to the custody papers, proof, I guess, that these events were real. Last week, during one visit, Marta mentioned that Greg had repeatedly asked Liam why he was too scared to see his father alone. Liam remained silent, busy stacking Legos. When I confronted Greg about it, he insisted he was just trying to bond with Liam and accused me of poisoning his mind. Of course, bonding does not explain why that night Liam had wet the bed. His therapist had warned me that stress can cause regressions in unexpected ways. Yesterday, Greg's parents arrived unexpectedly. I spotted their blue sedan through the window, the same car I used to wave at when we were still married. They brought what they called a BBQ care package for Liam, which included a teddy bear wearing a tiny shirt that proclaimed him the #1 grandson. Liam froze when he saw them. He neither cried nor spoke, only clutched my sleeve. I chose not to answer the door, and they eventually left after about 10 minutes. Later, Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned that she had seen them lingering by our mailbox and having an argument, and she asked if I was okay. I lied, saying that everything was fine. This morning, Child Protective Services called to report that I was isolating Liam from his family. The caseworker, while polite, asked to schedule a visit, and I insisted on having my lawyer present. Greg still doesn't know that I have kept every email, every voicemail, and every report from Marta. The judge had described me as thorough during the custody hearing, a description that hardly felt like a compliment. I'm sitting at the kitchen table right now, staring at the BBQ invitation taped to the fridge with a magnet. Liam is asleep upstairs with his nightlight glowing in the dark, and I keep thinking about my mom's words about family. Still, family should not require swallowing fear just to make others feel comfortable. I don't know if I'm making the right choice, but I do know this. When Liam quietly expressed his fear that Jake might hurt him again, his voice was steady while mine trembled. The CPS investigator is coming tomorrow, and I plan to show the evidence: the drawing in black crayon, the chart tracking bedwetting from the therapist, and even the photo of Jake smirking outside our window last fall. If Greg wants to cast me as the villain, then so be it. After all, villains don't spend their nights up until 2 a.m. researching childhood PTSD, nor do they weep in parking lots after supervised visits. I used to believe that co-parenting meant compromise, but now I realize that it means choosing your child's safety over someone else's pride, even when that someone happens to be his father, and even if it leaves you standing alone. The magnet holding the BBQ invitation is from the zoo, which Liam chose because it features a lion. He explained that the lion represented bravery, and I hope he's right. Now, for the first update. 2 weeks ago, I posted about my ex's family pressuring me to send Liam to their family BQ, and a lot of you asked what was happening, so here's where things stand. The day after I refused to let Liam go, Child Protective Services showed up. The investigator was polite but thorough, checking out Liam's room, his school records, and the custody paperwork. Liam clung to my leg the entire time, his fingers digging into my jeans as if he feared I might suddenly disappear. At one point, he whispered so quietly that he made it clear he never wanted to go to his father's place, a remark that I almost missed. However, the investigator did catch it. She paused with her pen hovering over her notepad and asked if he had said that on his own. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or sick. They closed the case 2 days later, calling it unfounded. My lawyer believes that Greg's parents filed the report out of spite, though proving that would be messy. Still, I printed the closure letter and taped it to the fridge next to Liam's latest drawing, a stick figure version of our house with the words "No Jake" scrawled across the roof in red marker. It might not be art therapy, but it's something. Greg's mom didn't take the news well. Later, my cousin sent me a screenshot of her Facebook rant, a long tirade about parental alienation and grandparent rights, capped off with a photo of Liam from 3 years ago at their pool, accompanied by a caption about missing his smile. Relatives I'd never met soon flooded the post with messages of support and criticism, which was overwhelming, so I closed the app and deleted it from my phone. In the next room, Liam was busy building a Lego spaceship while humming the theme from Bluey, and I didn't want him to see me cry. The worst part isn't the Facebook drama, though. It's the little things. The way Liam now flinches when boys at school play too roughly nearby, and how he constantly checks over his shoulder when we're at the park. His teacher called last week to say he'd started hiding in the reading nook during recess. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged in a way that seemed to say that even though his father wasn't there, he's still worried about what might happen. I couldn't offer him any real answers. Marta, the supervised visitation supervisor, has been my only ally through all of this. She's a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who carries a binder thicker than my divorce paperwork. During our last visit, she pulled me aside and explained that Greg had been repeatedly asking her to leave for a few minutes so he could speak with Liam alone. She refused, of course, but knowing he had made that request made my skin crawl. When I confronted him, he insisted that he only wanted to reconnect without an audience, a claim that struck me as odd given he had never mentioned it until after he had filed for a custody modification. Meanwhile, Greg's lawyer has geared up again, arguing that I am alienating Liam by keeping him away from family events like the BBQ. My attorney says the judge typically sides with stability, but that word hardly comforts me when my kid's therapist is emailing phrases like acute anxiety and regressive behaviors. The lowest point came 3 days ago. I discovered a note in Liam's backpack, written in his shaky handwriting, in which he apologized for being bad and said he would go to the BBQ. He had neatly folded it into a little square and tucked it in his pencil case as if it were a secret. When I asked him about it, he avoided looking at me, instead picking at a scab on his knee while murmuring that his grandma had told him he needed to be a big boy. It later emerged that during their last supervised visit, Greg's mom had cornered him by the swings and insisted that real boys don't hide from family. Marta hadn't heard the conversation, but she noticed that Liam had gone very quiet afterward. She ended the visit early, which I appreciated, though it left me wondering how many other things I'd missed. I filed another police report after that. Even though the restraining order against Jake clearly states he isn't allowed within 100 feet of Liam, Greg's parents brought him to the park anyway. He stayed exactly 50 feet away, leaning against their car with his arms crossed and a perpetual smirk on his face. The officer who took my statement sighed and mentioned that they would add it to the file. I wanted to scream, but instead I bought Liam some ice cream and let him stay up past bedtime watching Paw Patrol. The next day, Greg's lawyer sent a threat demanding that I drop the report or else they would subpoena my mother to testify about what they called my paranoia. My mom's been all over the place since the beginning, first siding with Greg's family, and then backtracking when she noticed how much Liam shuddered whenever his grandparents' names were mentioned. Last weekend, she showed up unannounced with a balloon that said "sorry" and a stuffed dinosaur. Liam hugged her, being kinder than I often felt, yet I caught her glance at the CPS closure letter on the fridge. She didn't bring it up, only remarking that I was doing right by him before leaving. It shouldn't have felt like a victory, but somehow it did. Lately, Liam's night terrors have returned. He wakes up sobbing about his father's house and about Jake's monster hands. I sit with him until he drifts back to sleep, tracing slow circles on his back, just as his therapist suggested. Every now and then, he asks questions I can't quite answer, wondering what might happen if his father allowed Jake to hurt him again, or why his grandma wouldn't believe him. I tell him that even grown-ups make mistakes, but those words just taste like ash. I've spent every night this week organizing evidence for the upcoming custody hearing. Incident reports, Marta's notes, the ER paperwork from Liam's broken arm, all neatly color-coded and stuffed into one binder I've nicknamed the nuclear option. It seems that Greg wants to paint me as the hysterical ex, so let him try explaining to the judge why his son draws pictures of himself hiding under tables, or justifying why Jake's so-called therapy only began after the custody motion was filed. The other night, as I was sorting through everything in the kitchen, Liam wandered in and stared at the binder with his lips pressed tightly together before asking if I was mad at him. I dropped to my knees so quickly that my joints cracked and reassured him that I wasn't angry, not even for a moment, and told him he was the bravest kid I knew. He nodded seriously and added that he would tell the judge he was scared, and then he went off to ask for some peanut butter toast. I don't know if we'll win this battle. The system is rigged for parents who play nice, and I stopped playing nice the moment I saw the x-ray of Liam's arm. But one thing is clear. Every document in that binder represents a promise. To Liam, to myself, and to the version of me who once believed that co-parenting meant meeting halfway. It turns out that meeting halfway simply isn't an option when the other side is a cliff. Now for the second update. 3 weeks ago, I wrote about the custody battle with my ex and his family's relentless push to force Liam into their lives. A lot of you asked about how the court hearing went, so here's an update. The night before the trial, I found Liam at the kitchen table, drawing a picture meant for the judge. It was our house, a blue rectangle with too many windows, and across the roof, in wobbly red letters, he had drawn a clear message rejecting Jake. He pressed so hard with the crayon that the paper tore in one corner. When I asked him if he wanted to talk about it, he simply explained that the judge needed to understand the rules, as though he were reciting a set of instructions from a game. I didn't sleep that night. During the hearing, Greg's lawyer tried to portray the situation as merely normal sibling rivalry, tossing around cliches like the idea that boys would behave that way, and that I was just being an overprotective parent. However, when he mentioned Liam's broken arm, my attorney produced the emergency room report, which clearly described injury patterns that raised suspicions and witness accounts that did not match up. For a moment, Greg's face froze, as if caught in a startled pause. Later during a lunch break, I unexpectedly ran into Greg's wife, Karen, at a grocery store near the courthouse. She was clutching a loaf of bread while waiting in line, her nails chipped and her hair frizzy at the roots. Upon seeing me, she mumbled that I was ruining her family, though her tone lacked conviction. What lingered in my mind, however, was the faint yellow bruise peeking out from under her sleeve. I chose not to confront her. I simply paid for my granola bars and left. But that bruise haunted me throughout the day, making me wonder if Jake's violence was affecting others as well. Marta, the visitation supervisor, arrived to testify wearing a blazer that looked borrowed. Usually all business, she appeared unsettled that day, her hands trembling as she explained that Greg had repeatedly pressured her to have brief moments alone with Liam. Later on, she confided that she was quitting her supervision duties altogether, lamenting the overwhelming family drama, though I could tell it had deeply shaken her. The hardest moment wasn't Greg's tearful display on the stand or his parents ambushing me outside the restroom. It was the way Liam's entire body stiffened when the judge asked to speak with him privately. I had spent days preparing him to be honest, yet his grip on his drawing tightened until his knuckles turned white. The bailiff even had to gently pry his fingers away from my hand. When they emerged from the judge's chambers, I noticed that Liam had started chewing his thumbnail again, a habit he had long left behind. The judge maintained a stern, unyielding expression while Greg's lawyer looked visibly perturbed. They proposed a settlement that involved unsupervised visits, provided that Jake stayed away. I refused not out of a desire to punish Greg, but because the idea of unsupervised visits felt like a trapdoor. One oversight, one unexpected appearance by Jake, and we'd be dragged back into this ordeal once more. Afterward, Greg cornered me in the parking lot. His breath carried a mix of mint gum and something sharper that I suspected to be whiskey. He declared that I was completely estranged from him, his voice shaking with emotion. For a brief moment, I saw the husband I had married a decade ago, the man who had once been moved to tears at our ultrasound photos. But then he abruptly sped away, his tires screeching as he left. On the ride home, Liam fell asleep in the car, the courtroom drawing crumpled in his fist. The custody evaluator is scheduled to visit next week. According to my lawyer, they will interview Liam and assess Greg's home, but my thoughts remain fixed on the unsettling smirk that Jake flashed in the park that day. How does one evaluate a home when the danger seems to wear the face of a teenager? What now keeps me awake isn't solely the fear of losing, but the nagging doubt. Did I push him too hard? Could my refusal of the settlement have become another source of trauma for him? I remember a note tucked in his backpack where he apologized for not being good enough, and I recall how in his sleep he mumbled about monstrous hands. Stability isn't just a buzzword, it's living without that constant need to flinch. Now for the final update. It's been a month since the court stripped Greg of unsupervised visits, and I've spent every day since waiting for the other shoe to drop. But last night, for the first time in 2 years, Liam slept through the dark without screaming. The custody evaluator's report was brutal. Greg tried to dismiss Jake's violence as typical boyish behavior, but the evaluator saw right through him. She criticized him for minimizing the broken arm incident, and when Greg's wife, Karen, refused to participate in the home inspection, the evaluator noted how she kept tugging her sleeves over her wrists. I didn't mention the bruise I'd seen. Some truths don't need my help to surface. The final line of the report still sticks with me. It stated that the father's failure to acknowledge harm signified an ongoing risk to the child's safety. When the judge said those words aloud, Greg's face went slack, as if someone had unplugged him. His parents didn't take it well. They sent a certified letter, as official as if we were business associates, declaring that they would no longer plead to see a grandson who had been alienated from them. Liam found the envelope in the mailbox and wondered if it was a birthday card. I explained it was just grown-up stuff, though he's too sharp for that. Later, I caught him studying their Christmas photo on my phone, the one where they're all wearing matching sweaters. He didn't cry. He casually remarked that his grandmother's hugs used to be overly tight before returning to his Legos. The real shift came with the night terrors, or rather, the absence of them. The day after the ruling, Liam slept for 9 straight hours without thrashing or sweating through his sheets. When I checked on him, I saw he had tucked his drawing of a courtroom with the words "No Jake" scrawled on the roof under his pillow like a talisman. His therapist mentioned that reclaiming control can seem insignificant to outsiders, but there's nothing small about a kid deciding where to place his fear. I ran into Marta at the library last week. She looked different in jeans instead of her usual supervisor blazer, softer somehow. She explained that she quit after our case, feeling there was just too much family drama, though she hesitated while mentioning that Greg's wife had once called her, distraught over what she described as Jake's outbursts. She said little more, and I didn't press. Some doors are better left closed. My lawyer thinks Karen might be planning to leave Greg. Apparently, local domestic violence groups have reached out to her, though I'm not sure how he uncovered that. Part of me hopes it's true, while another part remembers the way she sneered at me in the grocery store, the bruise on her wrist, and wonders if she'll ever allow herself to want something better. Liam's teacher mentioned that he's been joining games at recess again. He still avoids the jungle gym, the one with the monkey bars from which Jake had shoved him. But yesterday, he allowed a classmate to tag him during hide-and-seek. Progress isn't a straight line. It's a kid holding his breath while trying to trust the ground beneath him. My mom took him to the zoo, their first outing since the BBQ mess. In the parking lot, she apologized in a strained voice, explaining that she had only ever wanted him to have family. I reassured her that he did have family. She shed a few tears before buying him 3 overpriced stuffed animals. Greg's anger management program sent a letter asking if I would participate in a conversation about forgiveness. I discarded it. Liam doesn't need me to act nicely toward a man who still insists that Jake's actions were unintentional. Forgiveness requires remorse, and Greg had only ever expressed regret about being caught. Last week, I saw Greg at the gas station. He glared from across the pumps, his knuckles white around the nozzle. His car bore a fresh dent on the passenger side, jagged and unrepaired. I couldn't tell if it was from a fist or a thrown object. Meanwhile, Liam sat in the back seat, humming along to the Frozen soundtrack, completely oblivious. I maintained our stare until he finally looked away. The call came from Jake's school yesterday, not Liam's. They were setting up a meeting about his conduct with peers after he had shoved a 6th grader into a locker. The secretary fumbled over her words when she asked if I could attend, clearly confused as to why I was listed as an emergency contact. I hung up and dug through old emails until I found Jake's mom's address, the same woman who had left Greg 3 years ago. She replied within an hour, expressing her gratitude and explaining that she'd been trying to secure custody for months. Liam started karate lessons 2 weeks ago. His instructor mentioned that he was a natural when it came to blocking techniques. At first, he would apologize each time he successfully blocked a foam pad, worried he might have used too much force. But yesterday, after executing a flawless roundhouse kick, he beamed with pride and demonstrated his skill with uncontainable excitement. Now he sleeps with his white belt tied to his bedpost. Greg's parents' letter still sits in my desk drawer, untouched since the day it arrived. Sometimes I think about returning it, or even burning it. But Liam has started drawing new pictures. One of our house with the two of us, and a giant T-Rex he has named Protector Steve. The past can remain buried where it is. Last night, as I tucked him in, Liam reached for my hand and softly asked if I was there, his karate belt still dangling from the bedpost. I reassured him, and he stated firmly that he now felt brave, much like I did. It was said plainly and without hesitation. Down the hall, the bathroom's nightlight glowed while his door remained open. At that moment, there was no dramatic soundtrack or clever commentary, only the quiet cadence of Liam's steady breathing in the hall and the low hum of the fridge. There were no lawyers, no slammed doors, no fists against walls, just a sense of deep, unassuming peace. I finally understand what stability means. It isn't about a courtroom win or a custody paper. It's about a kid knowing that the monsters can't reach him anymore.